Good evening, everyone. Time for episode 18, starting on page 222. Get that high definition. Episode 18. Alright. I'm quite tired tonight, but I'll see if I can get through it. Alright. Carmen's fighting skill was both a combination of training, insight, and a great adaptability. She had learned just how strong these creatures were in her last fight, and she suspected that they were both primitive and savage. With her sword held low, she waited, hoping it would either leap over her or bridge the gap between them in an attempt to crush her beneath the bulk of its body. By some stroke of luck, it tried to leap past her. When it was airborne, she sidestepped. Wielding her sword two-handed, she brought her sword's tip to bear against its lower abdomen. Once it had left the earth, it couldn't change direction. Her blade bit deeply into its vitals. The Ant-Man landed in a devastating tumble, its lifeblood spewing forth thick and green. Running it down, she thrust her sword hard into the base of its head. It shuddered and soon lay still. Turning to view the battle, she again saw the gnome's captain. The look that he gave her left her with an uncomfortable chill. Tarek fought beside two fine gnomes. Imitating their taunting style of battle, he was able to join them in their fight against two of the Ant-Men. Between them, they were able to land numerous hits on the creatures. One of the gnomes bled from several small wounds, yet continued to fight vigorously. This close to the Ant-Men, Tarek's sword blazed a bright crimson, as if the flames hungered for the flesh of his enemies. Both of the Ant-Men had felt the bite of his enchanted blade and feared it. Soon the monsters began to fight more defensively, searching for an escape from the circle of pain. All around them throughout the cave, it began to rain. In desperation, the Ant-Men beat down the gnome on Tarek's left flank, accepting several hits from the others in exchange for a chance to escape. Indeed, Tarek and his allies could do nothing to stop such a concentrated attack, but there was something that a deadly dwarf could do. Having watched the battle progress, Kerr was finally forced to engage, although doubt still lingered within him. With battle-proven logic, he chose to act against their immediate threat, the Korg Trogan. Stepping in front of the two creatures, he advanced, preferring to fight on the move. The Ant-Men screeched in frustration when they saw their new enemy. Seeing no avenue of escape, save through this troublesome pest, they attacked. Their combined strength would be more than enough to defeat one small dwarf. Needless to say, Kerr was considered somewhat large for a dwarf, certainly taller than was average, and his bones and his body was nearly as tough as the Korg Trogans. In fact, he didn't think of himself as being too short or too weak, more like just right for a mountain dwarf, and at any rate, his people were known from ages long past for being exceptionally skilled in fighting much larger adversaries. Each time that the Ant-Men lashed out with their stone-tipped spears, they found only dwarven steel. Each time they drew too close, their bodies were met by a swinging axe or stabbing blade. Their frustration was complete. They hissed and spit. Their mandibles clacked. One of them was struck hard by an arrow. Wheeling away, it charged after its latest attacker. The second continued to attack, trying to crush him beneath its hulking body in a rain of hard blows. Kerr shrugged them off one by one, never standing in one place for more than a second. Rock of granite, he sang, mountains of stone, Morodeus' hammer of mithril steel, Korin Koth is again, Kurragoth. The blood of battle drove hard through his veins. He received its attacks and countered viciously, driving the beast back, hacking off two of its legs. It stumbled. Stepping twice and hacking thrice, he beat back the Ant-Man's spear, chopping off an arm and then its head. Striding side by side, Dao and Lien moved into the fray. To their left, Kerr ran after one of the creatures bearing down on D'Artin. To their right, One of the creatures lay dying, and Leander sped it on its way. Dao went to the aid of 3 gnomes who were faring badly. He wished that Karina was by his side, but the sickness was taking her, and she was near unto death. Together they could fight as one. 2 sets of Lyosulfar blades joined in a deadly dance of steel, but now he was alone. Leander was near, but he could not join in the dance. He would have to waltz well enough on his own. The Ant-Man was occupied, its back turned to him, but Dao knew that the creature was aware of him. Moving in, Dao readied his first blow, but the creature went into a sudden frenzy, striking out in all directions with weapons both natural and crafted. It created a killing swath about itself that felled all 3 of its enormous opponents and left Dao with a deep wound to his right thigh. A terrible thunderclap rang out, and then another. Cool rain began to fall. Fear filled the Ant-Man's hearts, for here in the under-earth only the splitting of rock by great volcanic forces made such sounds, and to be close enough to hear them meant imminent death, a death their instincts yearned to escape from. The Ant-Man wheeled about and charged. Bringing the shaft of its spear down, it sought to sweep him away, but Dao rolled under it, spun, and drove his sword hard between the segments of its torso. Reeling in pain, it tried to kick him away, but Leander hit him hard from the left. The creature fell rolling, still in the fight but badly hurt. Abandoning its spear, it grasped Leander and hauled him in, taking him about the chest and arms with its mandibles. Screaming in pain, he tried to resist their crushing grip. Violently shaken, he dropped his sword. Dao wasted no time. Running along the belly of the beast, his sword lashed out again and again, always striking the softer areas between the segments of his exoskeleton. The Ant-Man tried to bat him away with its legs and pincers, but Dao was always 1 step ahead. His final step launched him over the creature's head, his final stroke taking it in the neck. Even in death, it continued to squeeze its prey. Leander screamed and went limp. Dao hacked away at its jaws until it released him, but Leander was unconscious and couldn't be roused. Dao looked to Atran Daru. The storm above was waning. "I shall return you to his hand," Dao said, "unless you burn me." But the sword withheld its sting, and once it touched the young acolyte, the storm returned. Returning to the battle, Dao discovered that the 3 fallen gnomes were not dead, merely stunned, and they looked upon him in a way that seemed to portray respect, but there was more to it. He just couldn't put his finger on it. Raising his sword in salute, he ran to Dartin's aid. Standing with Carmen, they battled hard against the largest of the Ant-Men. The monster tore about itself with an enormous club of bone, and 2 gnomes lay broken at its feet. Raising his shield, Dartin's sword had long since left its scabbard. His arrows had taken 1 of the Ant-Men, but his actions had brought the attention of their apparent leader. The ever-watchful eye of Odin stared from his shield, but the god still slept, and the runes were lost to him. Carmen worked hard against it, but this Ant-Man was exceptional, its skill with its weapon more precise, more intuitive. Dartin's shield was struck hard, its frame bent. Carmen's legs were swept out from under her, and she landed hard. The air was blasted from her lungs and her already broken ribs. She tried to rise, but she couldn't breathe. Her armor had absorbed the worst of it, but she was hurt. Still the soldier, she strove to pick herself up, but the creature was on her now, using the weight of its abdomen to pin her down. She struggled to rise, straining every muscle, but while it remained on top of her, she was its prisoner. 2 enemies remained in front of it and 1 behind. They were small and smelled foreign to its world. It was an odor that brought about a strange fear within him, but the other small things that had attacked him had fallen easily and would feed many of the brood. Screaming in challenge, he raised his club and called its remaining brethren to his side. Kerr was forced to leave Carmen's side by the onrush of another of the beasts. Soon he was in a desperate place, fighting for his life against multiple opponents. He spun and chopped, slicing and hewing, trying to find an opening, but for the moment they fought at a stalemate. Tao was driven back by another. Dancing around, the two mortal enemies spun, with neither willing to offer an opening. It would take more than his skill with the blade alone to kill it. Searching his mind, he called upon a dragon's spell, magical fire, the will of Brandar, a long-dead sorcerer of old. With his words, he invoked it, and with his hands he channeled it. Power from the earth flowed through him, his mind directing it toward the beast, and from out of his hands sprang fire, a tunnel, a whirlwind like dragon's breath, and the Ant-Man was consumed. Its savage contortions drove it around the cave until it fell dead, its body aflame. Tao moved back to help his friends, but something stung his neck, and he knew no more. Dartin struck. Wading in, he accepted another hard blow in order to give one of his own. But he could find no easy mark, for the Ant-Man's speed and power were great. Shifting his weight, he turned his broken shield to meet the club and lashed out with his sword. His forearm was broken, his shield smashed. His blade found a vulnerable notch. He drove it in unto its hilt. The creature struck his sword arm away and took him in its mandibles. Raising him up, it flung him away into the gnomish host. He landed hard, all wrong, and his world went black. Many bodies were scattered. Leander was in a far distant place, a floating place free of pain and awareness, but his sword was well aware of its surroundings, and as long as its master lived, it could exert its own will. Its lightning would strike down until there was naught left of their enemies but ashes. A terrible bolt burned up through the body of the ant leader. It tried to crawl away, but its body was an empty shell. Smoldering, it slumped and died. Carmen was electrocuted. She was burned. She was crushed beneath the body of the beast, and finally, the paladin did sleep. The remaining Ant-Men, now leaderless, had lost all resolve. Another lightning strike, and Kerr faced only a single enemy. His party was faring badly. Several of them were probably dead or near dead, and it was entirely his fault. His father would have found another way for them to go. His brother would never have even risked it. The voices of 1,000 dwarven spirits filled his mind. The skill of 1,000 warriors filled his body. He was death incarnate. The creature was blasted by bolts of light. It reared but drove on. It tried to escape over him, but an axe clove through its breastplate. Its legs continued to push forward, but soon they were severed. Its mandibles still sought freedom. Its head, yearning for the security of dismal black caves, but soon it was smashed. Soon it was ended. Tarek and the gnomes surrounded their last enemy. The Korg Trogan was beyond desperate. Seeing its death upon it, it chose not to go alone. Rushing at the nearest gnome, it dropped its spear and lifted the poor wretch to its mouth. With a sudden snap, the gnome's head was severed, but its move cost it dearly. 10 gnomes laid into its legs and its body. Tarek leaped onto its back, driving his sword home in a reverse-handed grip that burned through its heart. Lunging backward, it threw him. Striking the wall of the cave, he fell hard to the floor. The creature tried to run, but the man-creature's painful claw protruded from its back, stealing its energy. 7 paces were all that it could manage. 7 paces, and not one more. The gnomes immediately went to work, bandaging their fellows and checking the side passageways to make sure that the ant-men were gone. The captain himself led his company in pulling the ant leader off Carmen. Kalor called upon his growing magical repertoire and incanted a spell that he'd learned from Modrul's treasure hoard. The spell was a simple one, and above them, a miniature sun illuminated the room with the light of day. At first, they all reeled away from the light, for surely such brightness was excruciating to eyes accustomed to the ever-dark. The storm began to recede, but a few clouds remained, challenging the new light and spilling out a light rain. "On your feet, Ranger," Kerr said, helping Tarek up. Spitting blood, He complied as best that he could, but he could barely stand. Thanks. Moving to the nearest carcass, Kerr wiped his blood-wetted blades clean upon it, but did not sheathe them. Squinting against the brightness, he strove to see greater detail in their strange allies, and with his eyes able to see well in both the light of the outside world and the deepest dark, he looked at each gnome in turn. Carmen was too close to their captain, too close. His mind screamed out, reliving memories of childhood nightmares, tales of boggle creatures of the darkest depths. These gnomes were not gnomes at all. They were the darkest of evil. They were the Darg. Tarek, unsuspecting, limped to retrieve his sword. For some reason, it continued to burn, melting through the body of the Ant-Man. Kalor knelt beside Dow, trying to revive him. A small black dart protruded from his neck. No! And it was then that he knew. Thinking quickly, he began to chant the words to another spell, but something stung his hand. Looking down, he saw the barb, for one instant, before the walls closed in. One-Eyed Jacks. Kerr must have rushed in and clove that captain in two, Polly said. Indeed, I said. He intended to do that very thing. But the Darg had planned that trap very carefully, and they were wary of Kerr most of all. But the Darg were having such a hard time against the Ant-Man, Eric said. Surely they were no match for Tarek and his enchanted blade. Yes, Tarek was a fine warrior, braver and even more capable than even he himself knew. But the Darg had only made it seem like they were fighting a losing battle. I see it now, Garrett said. The dead gnomes must have been real gnomes that the Darg captured. And that's why they were unarmed, Polly said. Your assumptions are all correct, but back then, only Kerr knew the truth in time enough to act. Poison. The gnomish captain knelt behind Carmen, cradling her head and shoulders in his arms. Several of his kin stood around him, squinting against the conjured light. The captain drew a twisted wand from his coat and touched it to her helm. Miraculously, it released its seal upon her neck, and he easily removed it. Her matted hair spilled out, and for a moment she regained consciousness. Looking into his blackest of eyes, orbs like lumps of lifeless coal, she could see only malice. Looking at his twisted fingers, she could feel only contempt. The eager beat of his heart echoed only evil. Kerr was right. She had been a fool to rush them into all of this, and now it was too late. Greetings, he said. I am Sir Gorfar Norgar Kuchnuk. It was a good gnomish name, and quite common among them, but he was no gnome, and to his company it was only a signal. In a flash of movement, reaching into the hidden folds of their cloaks, each Darg brought slender blowguns to their lips. In the span of a breath, poisoned darts found unprotected flesh, a part of the face, a bit of neck, or an ungloved hand. In the surprised span of a gasp, Carmen's world vanished, and Tarek fell to the floor, but felt none of the pain of it. Sever the hand that holds the sword, their leader ordered, and then the clouds vanished, and with them the rain. 7 companions were down. 7, but not 8. For Kerr was born upon a bed of granite near the silent heart of a volcano, and his flesh could withstand more poison than any human or Halfar. In his hands were the eternal spirits of 1,000 ancient dwarves, and the short sword that had yet to find its name. In his heart burned a seething rage, but his anger was instantly tempered, for poised above Carmen's unprotected throat was the captain's razor-sharp wrist dagger. "Drop your weapons," he shouted in Kerr's own tongue. "Drop them, or I will bare her throat to the bone." Kerr wanted to fight them all. He wanted to crush these abhorrent, twisted likenesses of his kin into the earth. Indeed, with the madness growing within him, he might have been capable of it. Nevertheless, he knew that such an act would mean the certain death of his friends, and he could not live with such great weight upon his shoulders. Men and women had died under his leadership in the past, but he liked to think that fewer had died than would have had he not led them. His friends were beyond choice, and they had not yet been killed. It was a disturbing fact that told him that they had some other grim purpose for them. All the old tales swore that it was better to be dead than prisoners of the Darg. Their captors lived only long enough to experience suffering so terrible that it was said to cause the death of one's soul. Despite all his terror, something within him told him that while there was life, there was hope, and that is what he had to believe. Lowering his weapons, his heart was filled with grief and impotence. Several more darts struck him, and then some more, and after a while, he knew no more. "All dying," giggled one of them, whose name meant Black Bible. "Them has got the plague, or too many wounds to live." "Bind their wounds," ordered their captain. "Remember the blood debt. After this quest, the debt is paid. We owe the son of Aclon no more. It shall be paid, and no surfacer will yet live who has seen our halls. The plague or their hurts will finish them. It is a long walk to the great chasm and cleave Magar." One-Eyed Jacks. It was a busy night at the tavern. A band of gypsies had made camp for the night in Waysboro Common, and their talented dancers had put on quite a show. Now, well into the evening, the tired performers and their families had filled every vacant seat in the place. Food and ale were almost flying across the bar, and One-Eye's servers were hard-pressed to keep up with it. One of the gypsy elders, named Jan, a man of dark complexion, bright-colored clothes, and long graying hair, had joined us by the fire. Jan was anxious to hear my story because his family had fought valiantly in defense of Safe Haven during the Queen's invasion. A cup full of keg porter wine rested in my hand and filled my mind with rising memories as I raised my glass to toast my audience. With the tip of my left forefinger, I swirled Kerr's wonderful elixir and then tossed a few drops into the air above the table. Smoke from nearby pipe smokers and steamy air from the kitchen mingled above the ceiling rafters above us, where a solitary mouse scanned the inn beneath him, memorizing the location of the choicest scraps, for after the last of the candles were out and his time began. With a word in Kerr's wine, my illusion took shape in the vanishing vapors between us, and there, before us all, was the horrifying, sinister, smiling face of Black Bible. Everyone there who saw his face gasped in horror and shuddered. Many said quiet prayers or made signs against the evil eye. I then banished his image with my words and began my tale anew. They bound and gagged us all, trussing us up in sacks sewn from the skin of some under-earth beast. They then attached us to long poles like game for the table, and in this manner prepared to carry us through the treacherous ways of their homeland. Their vile poisons were so strong that none of us awoke or had any memories of that journey, save terrible dreams of wicked laughter and sinister voices whispering promises of tortures unimaginable. Our unconsciousness was our blessing, for if any of us had awoken to witness any portion of Gruelthank, then that onlooker would have been instantly silenced, condemned to breathe no more. Down and down they brought us, carrying us south, across many miles of winding tunnelways laced with countless traps and deadly pitfalls. If any of us could have seen their labyrinthine killing grounds, we would have observed the bones of their unfortunate enemies, resting in their contorted positions of death. Here, so far from the light, the merciless one had many followers. Their lands were a nightmare to any kind-hearted soul, but it was a heaven under earth to the Darg. Okay, we'll end the episode there on page 232 and take up the next episode on page 233 with the chapter entitled Volg Sharn. Thank you. Hope you had a good, enjoyable time listening. Have a great night.